He saved my life, you know. 30 years ago, I was knifed in a bazaar in Calcutta. He carried me to the hospital on his back.
Who stabbed you?
He did.
You know what they do in that particular department anyway. Are you still a cop? No! No! Swear on your mother's grave you're still not a cop?
Can I not walk up there quick?
Oh, look, David, a boot.
A boot.
Don't hit George, David.
I wasn't gonna hit George.
Daffodils.
They're your favorite flower.
How did you get so many?
I called everywhere in 5 states. I told them it was the only way to get my wife to marry me.
You don't even know me.
I have the rest of my life to find out.
Hey, how are you? Mark here, back once again. This is like several weeks in a row now with a new to you episode of the Cinemaniacs. I am Mark, I am the Cinemaniac. You are you, and you are probably a Cinemaniac if you're bothering to watch this. Thus, together, we are collectively the titular Cinemaniacs, back with, well, not a lot to talk about. The last few weeks have been lean, and this is going to be the same. I'm sort of still playing catch-up with theaters and video and things like that, so this is all stuff that is still available in the theater, that is already available on video or the streaming service of your choice. And starting off in the theaters, we're going to give it just a little longer so that the man behind the curtain can get to the console to push the button. We're going to give a little preamble, if you will, of the first film we're going to talk about. What is the first film we're going to talk about? Oh yeah, it's that one. This is a film that is in the theater. This is featuring Tom Hanks as Fred Rogers, the story of a journalist who's sort of not happy in life or has troubles, who goes to interview Mr. Rogers very reluctantly and comes to know the man and the character and how similar or dissimilar they may be. And ultimately, I don't want to give anything away. You know me, I don't do the spoiler thing. I like the film to unfold in front of you in the theater. So let's say the reporter may or may not find out if it is indeed a beautiful day in the neighborhood. About a year ago, there was a Fred Rogers documentary. I believe, could be wrong, I believe it was called Won't You Be My Neighbor. It was amazing. It was great. It was his life. It was his career. It was the show. It was his everything to do with Mr. Rogers. And it was one of those cry-in movies, especially if you're somebody who grew up watching the show. It made you just have a burning desire for somebody like that to still be on TV and doing what he did. And it shows you really the importance of what Fred Rogers did for a generation or two or three or more of people. I don't know if he has any resonance with the youth of today. I don't know that his show is on. I don't know. I just don't know. So anyway, when this film was announced, Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, with Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers, a lot of people got excited because the documentary had sort of sparked interest or memories or renewed interest in Mr. Rogers with a lot of people my age and older and younger. But then there were schmoes like me who said, but we just had a great documentary. What is this film going to do that documentary that was perfect didn't already do? So I was a little dubious going in. But allegedly based on a true story of an Esquire journalist who was known for being hard-hitting and combative and not always being liked by his subjects, being given the assignment to go and interview Mr. Rogers, the nicest man in the world, for a profile piece about heroes. It was basically just supposed to be, according to the film, it was just supposed to be 400 words that were going to accompany a photo or two in this hero issue. So what you get here is a film that is not the life story of Mr. Rogers. I would argue, my first gut reaction upon seeing it was that it's more about the journalist and his life than it is about Mr. Rogers and his life. Now, certainly the presence of Fred Rogers is felt throughout the film. Basically, the journalist who has a big chip on his shoulder and has a very bad relationship with his father goes to interview Mr. Rogers, and Mr. Rogers is more interested in helping the journalist than he is having the journalist just ask him questions, and the two become friends, and you know, it may very well turn out to be a beautiful day in the neighborhood. If you're going in expecting a Mr. Rogers biopic, you're not going to get that. If you're going in expecting a film that's all about Mr. Rogers, you're not going to get that. You get a little bit of behind the scenes about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It takes place, I believe, in the late 90s is when this film takes place. And it really is mostly with the journalist. It's mostly about his life and his issues, and it is very surreal at times, which I thought was kind of cool. I don't want to get into how and why. One thing I will say, you get the opening shot of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, if you ever saw it. If you never did, YouTube is a wonderful thing. The camera sweeps over this little model town with little cars and things like that, and it comes to rest on a little house, and that's Mr. Rogers' house on the show. This film takes that idea and uses it throughout. So you see Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but then when we're talking about Pittsburgh, it's like a model version of Pittsburgh with little tiny cars and airplanes moving around, and then a model version of New York City with cars and airplanes. And it was really well done, and to my eye, it was done with actual models. It wasn't just done with computers like everything else is now. Thus, as fake as it looked like it was really there. So it was really interesting stylistically and how it sort of blurs fantasy and reality a little bit. It's really more about the journalist than Mr. Rogers. What most people probably want to know after hearing all that is, how is Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers? He certainly evokes the spirit of Mr. Rogers, the tone and the mannerisms. For me, I have a hard time with biopics where it's a really recognizable actor, movie star, who is playing a very recognizable person in real life that I've seen. So, I have a hard time not just seeing the actor. So for me, I never really didn't see just Tom Hanks. I saw Tom Hanks playing a character called Mr. Rogers, but I never sort of lost him in the role like I kind of wished I would. It probably would have been more successful with a less well-known actor doing that in terms of just wanting to think that I'm watching Mr. Rogers. It's a very positive film because it's about Mr. Rogers. It's about Fred Rogers. It's a very grown-up film. I mean, I don't think there's anything overtly objectionable in the film, but I've heard reports of people going to see this and bringing their kids or bringing a lot of kids, and I'd be really curious if you brought your kid to see Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, what did they think of it? Because I don't know that a child would really get into this movie so much, because to me it's about grown-ups and their problems and philosophy and kindness, which is a fairly sweet thing. There are kids in the movie briefly, but it's really about, an adult and a senior citizen having a lot of conversations and family and discord and resentment and all these sort of things that if you're a good person and if you have the mental mettle to do it, you can rectify these situations while family members are still alive. Some people don't get that chance. And this film is basically Fred Rogers as a catalyst and his sense of good and love and propriety, helping out somebody who maybe didn't have that in their life. Based on a true story. Website you may have heard me mention called History vs. Hollywood that I love. I see any movie that's a biopic or based on a true story, after I see it, I'll go to History vs. Hollywood just to see how accurate it was so I can kind of talk about it here. This film, not terribly accurate. To the degree where the journalist whose story this is based on had them change the name of his character in the film because it was so barely accurate as far as reality. There are elements that really happened. The thing you see in the trailer where the kids on a subway train song to Mr. Rogers, that really happened. There really was a journalist who had to do this story and wound up befriending Fred Rogers and staying, friends for many years, I think until Mr. Rogers' death. And there are aspects of what Fred Rogers did that are accurate, but the whole story that you see unfold in this film and the journalist with a father he's estranged from, most of that is bogus. Most of that is made up. So, I thought the film was fine while I watched it. I think I was maybe disappointed that it was more about the journalist than about Mr. Rogers. I don't always expect 100% accuracy, but when I read about this and how fabricated the whole thing was, I think I maybe think even less of it in retrospect. It's just like, what this movie is doing is showing you what a great guy Mr. Rogers was and how he did all these amazing things. And there are moments in the film where you're like, oh wow, he actually did that. He went a long way for this person. And then you read it and find out, it's like, no, that's totally made up. That never really happened. As a film, it's very uplifting, it's very tender. It does make you think about Fred Rogers and what a great guy he was. If you read into the reality of the man, a lot of what you see in the film is based on things that really happened, if not the way that they happened in the film that you just saw. I just don't know if people are going to be disappointed in this, thinking they're getting a movie that's a lot more about Mr. Rogers, or taking their kids to see this movie, which I don't think this is particularly rated R, but I just can't imagine a kid connecting with this, especially if they don't even know who Mr. Rogers was, or if they only know him from TV and now it's Tom Hanks pretending to be this other guy. I don't know. It was light and whimsical at times, which I really appreciated. The moments of fantasy I really appreciated, and the moments where you sort of, it did something unusual I liked. But as a film on the whole, I was just kind of so-so on A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Speaking of families, we move on to a film that is about family. It's all about family here at Cheshire TV, or YouTube, or Facebook, or wherever you're watching this right now. This is a film directed by the director of The Last Jedi, and some Brick and Looper, and some other films you may have heard of. And it's about a big old rich family. The patriarch, their father, dies, and under mysterious circumstances, and they all gather together to be there for the reading of the will, and be there to try to figure out who or why he was knifed in the throat. And a very interesting Southern gentleman detective, gentleman sleuth, is on hand to be witness to when all of the Knives Out. There's an interesting phenomenon that happens for me every once in a while. I go to the movies a lot, partly by choice and partly to have things to talk about on this program. And I go to certain theaters repeatedly. I'm a regular at certain theaters. I'm irregular at even more theaters, depending on what I eat. And the trailers play before the film. And generally, I have a love-hate relationship with trailers. I love trailers. I love the art of the movie trailer. I hate that so many trailers give too much away. And I hate that so many trailers use the same format. It is predictable and annoying. I think most trailers could be cut in half. I think teasers are better than trailers. Anyway, the Knives Out trailer I've seen in front of damn near every movie I've gone to see for the last several months, to the degree where I got sick of seeing that trailer, and it gets to the point where I start actively hating a movie I've never even seen because I'm so sick of the trailer. And I can't wait to see a movie because it means when it comes out, I won't have to see that damn trailer anymore. That has been the case for Knives Out. It never looked that great to me to begin with. The trailer that I was seeing looked very over the top and hammy and like it would be kind of annoying to me. And that trailer played in front of everything I saw. And we're talking between 2 and 4 movies a week for months. That gets tiresome. So going into Knives Out, I was like, oh, finally, at last, I don't have to see the trailer anymore, and I hope this movie's good because it looks annoying. Well, luckily, the film I thought was far better than the trailer was. It's not as broad in its comedy, and it's not as much of a straight-out comedy as the original trailers made it look. I didn't love Knives Out. I guess I thought it was okay. I'm feeling that about more and more things. I think it's okay. The cast certainly is stellar, although I've always felt like a good cast does not make a good movie. Good writing makes a good movie. Good writing and good directing, because you can have the best cast in the world, and if the script's terrible, the movie sucks. And you can have the best director in the world, and if the script is terrible, that movie sucks. Although a really good director can probably get around bad writing with really good visual flourishes or something like that. But really, when you have a movie like this that is based upon, it's sort of a mystery, or you go in thinking it's going to be a mystery, and it's a great cast and snappy dialogue and switcheroo twists and dramatic reveals and all of that. I didn't feel like that was strong in any department. The acting cast, the actors were fine, but a lot of them weren't really given that much to do. Some were better than others, but a lot of them just kind of sat there and recited this dialogue that wasn't that great. Literally just sat there and recited that dialogue. Christopher Plummer is wonderful. It's great that we're still seeing Christopher Plummer in meaty roles in big films this far into his life and career. A lot of people I really like are in this, but again, I don't feel like they had a heck of a lot to do. Daniel Craig, current James Bond, playing the Southern Miss Marple, the Southern Hercule Poirot, whatever, was just kind of there. Didn't really dig him too much. Everybody else was just kind of there. When it was trying to be funny, I didn't really find it funny. There was one moment toward the end that I laughed out loud because Chris Evans utters one brown expletive, shall we say, that used to be a thing that in movies was like a guaranteed laugh. Back when I was a kid in PG movies, you'd throw the brown word out there, and timed just right, it was really funny. And in this movie, it happened, and it was like a little nostalgic throwback for me that somebody said that word that I will be editing out of the trailer that you didn't just see if you're watching this on cable. and it made me laugh. Otherwise, I didn't think it was that funny. It's not really a mystery. I don't want to give that too much away, but I will say it's more, let's just say it's much more like a Columbo episode than it is a Murder, She Wrote. It's well shot. It's well put together. This location is really cool, this big old estate where it takes place. But otherwise, I just was like, it was yet another movie that I'm watching in the theater, and we get 3/4 of the way through the film, and I'm like, I just don't care anymore. You could just wrap this up anytime. Just wrap it up and I'll hit the road, because I just wasn't digging it. There's no big grand, well, there is sort of a big reveal. There is a reveal that's very well done and very dramatic and sort of tragic. But then after that, you're just sort of watching everybody else get caught up with where you are. And again, there were no major switcheroos that I really appreciated. There were no big dramatic reveals. There were no moments of suspense that were insanely suspenseful to me. I just really didn't think it was that great. And it kind of felt like one of those late in the year releases, if you know what I mean, where it's not the summer movie season and it's not the Christmas movie season. We're just we're dumping some releases out here that we know are not going to be wildly popular. We're going to give them a crazy big push, smash and grab, spend a lot of money on advertising to get butts in seats and get that big first weekend, because we know this is going to drop off. I don't know. I will say that there are a lot of people I know online who, I know people in person too. There were a lot of people I saw online who said they really liked this movie and they thought it was a blast. So it could just be me, but and maybe I was biased from seeing the damn trailer so much, but I just wasn't that into this movie. And it's too bad, because again, you've got an amazing cast, you've got a director who certainly knows how to make a good movie, and it just did not have the sharpness or the darkness or the edge to it that I had hoped it would have. The movie we're going to talk about next probably suffers from having too much of all that. And actually, the movie that we're going to watch next is interesting, would make an interesting pairing if you could see the two together, and theoretically you really can. So anyway, Knives Out in theaters now. Probably fine for most people. Probably most people would think it's fun. I just thought it was not that great. So that is all I saw in theaters. This is actually legitimately all I saw in the theater this weekend. Now we move on to that which you can see on home video, on the format, platform, service, disc, wax cylinder of your choice. First up is a film, it's all about family. This is the week after Thanksgiving. We're headed toward Christmas and Hanukkah and all the holidays around the holidays. So we're just going to talk about films with family. And even if the film is about one guy in a prison cell, I'm going to say it's about family because I want to keep the theme going. This is a film about a young woman who is marrying into, here we go again, a rich family at this giant country estate. And she finds out that they have this kind of wacky, kind of nutty, you just kind of go with it, this weird little tradition that they do whenever someone new is entering the family. And they just play a game of hide and seek. It's just a game of hide and seek with guns and knives and ropes. There may have been a crossbow. Weapons. They play hide and go seek with weapons. And basically the deal is if she survives the night, she gets to be part of the family. And if she doesn't, she's dead. This is Ready or Not. So we have another tale of family, like Knives Out, a dysfunctional family, like Knives Out, where the knives are literally out in this film. This is, I guess you'd call this a horror movie, horror thriller, dark comedy horror thriller, where this woman discovers that she is the prey and all of her new family members are the predators, and she just needs to survive the night and eventually take matters into her own hands and try to take them out before they take her out. Very violent, very gorily violent film. Mostly CGI gore from what I recall. I saw this in the theater, I really didn't like it. I thought this was really aggressively trying to be edgy and funny, and it was really not funny. It was like aggressively unfunny to me. And this was one where, again, I say I decide I stop caring or I turn on the film. It wasn't very far into this. And this was one I'd heard a lot of people really liking and really excited for when I saw it. And I just hated the tone, the nasty, smug, cynical tone about everything. Like, you just kind of hate everybody in the movie, except maybe the lead. She's cool. She's our hero, or heroine. But I really didn't like it. It's one of those flicks that comes along where it's just so aggressively nasty in its tone and giddily offing everybody. And again, I love horror movies. I should be digging something like this, but I really kind of hated Ready or Not. It kept going and going and going, and the gore was whatever. And ultimately, it has sort of a surprise ending, which I just thought was ridiculous. It goes to an area where you never think it's going to go. And I didn't like the acting. It was really dark and kind of hard to see at times. I really didn't like Ready or Not. So I can't give it the Cinemaniac seal of approval. Sorry. But it's out now. Now, speaking of movies I generally do like quite a bit, we're going to move on to a half hour for this. Hey, it's the Arrow Video Corner. This is Arrow Video, based in the UK, also now has a US branch, and they release all kinds of cool retro films onto Blu-ray pretty much every week. So many that I'm still playing catch up with what they've sent me over the last few weeks. Arrow puts out a lot of cult and horror films, anything from the 40s to to present. They put out new films on video too. This is a film that I recall seeing on, well, why not go over here? This is a film I recall seeing on Cinemax back in the late 80s or early 90s. Film from 1988, stars Chad Lowe as a young guy in very rural Pennsylvania in the 1920s who hooks up with this local, is he a faith healer? Is he a preacher? Is he a doctor? Is he an exorcist? We're not quite sure, but they go on a hunt to rid evil from people. They want to heal people, to extract the vile humors from people who are sick and eradicate them, but also take out the bad guy who's trying to use his evil wizardry to undo their biblical magic. And Chad Lowe, unfortunately, don't want to give anything away, finds himself an apprentice to murder. So despite it saying Blu-ray in the UK, this is out now in the US on Blu-ray from Arrow Video. This was a film from 1988. It was, I don't ever remember this coming out in theaters, at least nowhere near where I was at the time. This is something I discovered on cable, or I saw some of on cable. And I'm never sure how easy this was to see on video. I think it's been available off and on in different formats. So you have Chad Lowe as this young guy who's following Donald Sutherland because he's theoretically helped cure his father of alcoholism or some ailment, and he's helping him. He is literally the apprentice to murder. He's helping him, cure people with these strange toxins, these strange elixirs and I hate to say spells, but that's kind of what it is. All this mumbo jumbo, trying to get people healed with the power of the Bible and the power of faith and the power of weird concoctions and all this other stuff. And ultimately, it is found to not really be helping a lot of people. It's more of a coincidence that they get better. And eventually things escalate where this person that Donald Sutherland views as this evil wizard in the woods is doing magic against him or something. It escalates to something pretty dark. And it is based on a true story. The extras on this disc are pretty healthy. They give you a history of the film itself and then a history of this genre of sort of religious fanaticism in horror films. Although I wouldn't really call this a horror film. I would really call this a drama that has some lightly fantastical elements to it and also has something kind of horrifying that happens toward the end. But otherwise, it's really just... It's a rural drama about these people. It's got Mia Sara in it, who you may know from Ferris Bueller's Day Off or Legend. And she and Sutherland are the two biggest names. Chad Lowe was always around a bit, Rob Lowe's younger brother. I didn't really care for this that much. It's very... slight isn't the right word. It's very lean in terms of production value. It's low budget, but it looks authentic to the era where it's taking place. It's just very low key. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. It's very mellow and low key as it kind of goes along, and it's got that sort of rural, sort of like slow bluegrassy kind of, that's not even the right word, score. And the transfer looks great. It looks like, it wasn't shot for a heck of a lot, and it's not like everybody in the 20s was wearing blazing colors in their rural locations. So the color palette is fairly restrained, but it looks really good. It looks like a movie that was shot far more recently than, 31 years ago. The extras are very interesting. I watched most of those. They give a good insight into the film's production and like I love with a lot of extras, it gives you context for this genre and where this film kind of fits in with other things. You have Kat Ellinger talking for, I think, maybe 20 minutes or so about this sort of style of film and then this film in particular. And again, it wasn't a film that really connected with me. I had seen it on cable years ago and didn't think a lot of it. It was interesting to revisit it again 3 decades later, but it's not my bag, man. At any rate, Arrow has that out now. If you're a fan of this movie, you've never had a better version and probably never will be again. And that is Apprentice To Murder, as they would say in Superfuzz. So, speaking of films from the late 80s, we have a film, another film that I caught on cable late in the 80s. This is an adaptation of a V.C. Andrews novel. And if you know who V.C. Andrews is, you know what I want to be talking about. V.C. Andrews wrote a whole spew. Yeah, sure. V.C. Andrews spewed forth a whole bunch of novels that I always used to see at the checkout aisle at the grocery store when I was at the grocery store with my mother, and they'd be the kind that would have the ornate kind of foil covers with a little cutout, and you'd open it up and there'd be some kind of creepy picture on the first page. This is one that I saw often there. Huge novel. It's about a mother with her 4 children who finds herself in destitute times and goes reluctantly to live back to the old family estate again. It's a film about family and a giant house on a hill where really messed up stuff happens. She goes back to the family estate, and her super religious, super strict mother, played by Louise Fletcher, is there, and the children, one thing leads to another. The children are confined to a room in the belfry, and we could very euphemistically call them flowers in the attic. It's interesting, when this came out, I remember thinking, I was 13 at the time, and I remember thinking, man, isn't it a little late? Now, it's never too late to adapt something. You have people adapting books that were from decades ago, but for whatever reason in my head, it felt like this is a film that should have been made much sooner than it was. That has nothing to do with the quality of the film. That was just something I always remember thinking. And I watched it at the time, and I didn't think all that much of it. I remember thinking it was okay, and watching it again, I think it's okay. It's from 1987. It feels pretty 1987. It's funny watching the trailer that we just played here, that if you're watching this on YouTube, you won't see. The quality of this Arrow disc obviously is great. It's easily the best the film has ever looked. It looks bright and colorful and like it was shot very recently. It doesn't look like, again, a 32-year-old movie. But the trailer that we just ran, it looked really dark, like not restored, like things used to look when you saw them on videotape originally or on TV, just not as good as they should. And I almost think this film would fare better if it looked a lot darker, because it just looks overlit to me in this transfer. And obviously Arrow does the right job, so they're not going to color time it incorrectly. So I think that's the way it's supposed to have looked. But the film, basically, it's this woman and her children, and the father is killed in a car accident, and they're destitute, and they have to go back to live, as I just said. They have to go back, in case you tuned in late, they have to go back and live at the estate where she grew up with her mother, who she was estranged from, the mother. And Louise Fletcher is this mother or grandmother. She's very strict. She's very Bible-thumping, sinning is bad and all this stuff. And eventually the children are basically held prisoner while the mother goes off to do something. We're not sure. She's off to find a better life. She's off to find somebody to marry so that they can move out of there. Basically, the kids are left on their own. And eventually they wind up being locked in the attic and more or less starved and forgotten and worse. And it's just this really grim tale of how these kids try to band together and maintain the family unit and stay sane and stay alive while they're just being punished for every little imagined infraction and just neglected to the point of lethality, shall we say. Now, I never read the book. There was a series of books from V.C. Andrews. I don't know that they were all connected to these same characters, but I know that there's a lot more unseemly behavior amongst the siblings, shall we say, in the book than there is in this film. It's sort of hinted at here, but I know in the film there was a lot more. And looking at the extras, which are very interesting, to me the extras are almost more interesting than the film for me. There was more shot and insinuated that was cut out of the film, probably because they thought audiences wouldn't be able to handle the siblings being that revelry with each other, that familiar with each other, shall we say. So it is it's creepy at times. Louise Fletcher is good. She's practiced at being the evil matron character, and the kid actors not terribly strong, shall we say. And to me, that's the failing of the movie. Victoria Tennant's fine. The adult actors are fine, but the kids are not that great, and the kids are who we spend all the time with in this movie. And the whole thing felt kind of cheesy to me. Not that it was dated, although it is, but I mean, everything's dated. I hate when anybody was like, it was pretty dated. Yeah, it's from 1942. It's going to feel dated now. It's when it came from. But to me, the aspects of it that, if I want to say dated, was the production style. The way it looked just looked cheap to me. It looked like a cheap, I don't know, a cheap dollar rental that I would have watched back then and went, eh, I guess it was worth $1. That's kind of how I felt about this movie now. There may be fans of this. If you're a fan, I'm spitting like a maniac. There may be fans of the book that dig the movie. I'd be very curious to know. movies@CheshireTV.org. Send me a message, or on Facebook here. If you read the original book and you've seen this movie, what do you think of the movie? I know there was 2014 apparently, another take on this film, which I'm curious to see now, to see how much edgier that is, how much it's different from the story that it's presented in this film, and just how it plays, because this one really, it doesn't fare well for me. I think this is probably more for fans of 80s films in general, or people who are fans of this movie. It's certainly a great edition of it, but it just did not connect with me, and I just felt like it was really kind of cheesy, down to the music and everything. And it might just be because it doesn't age well in my head from when I saw it, but I kind of remember thinking that back then to a degree too. Extras are very cool. You have an alternate ending for the film, which often happens. Ending is shot for a film, test audiences look at it, they don't like it, they go back and they either re-edit it, or they shoot some new bits, or they totally refilm a whole new ending. So you get that alternate ending, and then you get the original ending, or alternate ending, I can't recall, with a commentary on it. So where the person who was hired to come in and just rewrite the ending tells you how he was hired and what they decided to do and what it originally was and what didn't work. Very interesting. You have interviews with a lot of production people. You have the person who was the set designer, I think the composer, and someone else. I didn't get a chance to watch all of it, but there was a good amount in there. And I believe there's a commentary for the duration of the film too. So if you're a fan of this movie, this certainly is a nice addition for you with those cool extras. Like that alternate ending was from like a Betamax tape that was a Betamax transfer of the ending that was the only surviving copy, that kind of thing. So Arrow really pulls out the stops when they have access to this material for movies that people like, even if that's not me. So now, speaking of family, this is not a family film, though the family members were very grieved after some of these things happened. This is a film from Box Office International. If you're like me and you see those words, Box Office International, flying at you from outer space, you hit stop and you eject the disc. In this case, I didn't. Harry Novak, another name. His name on a film guarantees mediocrity for the most part. I think I've seen maybe 2 Harry Novak films that I've liked. This, in case you're not in the know, Box Office International was like an American International or a Crown International. They were a releasing company in the 60s, 70s that put out a lot of exploitations, horror, sleaze, trash films to theaters and drive-ins. A lot of it, they were just picking up films that were already finished and, you know, paying that person and then releasing them. And some of it, they did fund the films themselves. Like I said, generally it is the sign of non-quality when I see Box Office International. This is a Box Office International release that Arrow has picked up to put out. Previously, Something Weird had this out on DVD. Their Something Weird library is being divided amongst a lot of entities now for reissues. And I guess maybe it's just the Harry Novak library at this point. Anyway, this is a film that tells the very gruesome tale of a young, deranged man who's drives a delivery van for, I think, a dry cleaner, and he just likes to pick up hitchhikers. He doesn't put them back where he found them. He does not leave them better than he found them. He does not, he does fold, spindle, and mutilate, actually. This is a man who does very terrible things to hitchhikers when they, unfortunately, take the hitchhike to hell. I often say, you know, if a trailer can't make a movie look good, that movie's probably not going to be very good. I'd seen this once before via the Something Weird release. I think it was paired with The Kidnapped Co-Ed, which might have been better. I remember seeing one of those Something Weird discs that had 2 Harry Novak films, and one or both were actually good, and I couldn't believe it. I had to tell a friend, I've seen a good Harry Novak movie. So Hitchhike to Hell, it plays a lot like, if you've ever seen the Mystery Science Theater episode Teenage Strangler, it almost feels like the Teenage Strangler grew up and became the guy in this movie. So the acting is pretty bad. Production values are pretty cheap. It looks super grainy, and I'm guessing that's just because, I mean, the color looks great in this. The restoration is fantastic, but it looks like probably this was shot in 16 millimeter and blown up to 35, thus all the grain. It's just not great. Some people like this kind of stuff. I come and go with this stuff. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It has to have a good pace to it, and good pacing and good writing and surprising is all I really ask for. Production quality can kind of slide a little if that's going on, but it was kind of dull. It was kind of cheap. It was kind of, not great sound recording a lot of the time, not great acting a lot of the time, not great directing a lot of the time. Editing could give or take. It's very 70s. If you're like me and you have a fondness for just the era, it's something because the cars and the clothes and the storefronts and all that, you can at least get off on that. It's not really explicitly gruesome, but the subject matter is not pleasant. It's a guy who does unpleasant things to hitchhikers and then offs them. So it's pretty unseemly. What's weird is that you're balancing the subject matter and what the guy is doing in the film with how cheesy and after school specially it feels sometimes, and it's a weird conflict. Maybe that works for some people in that it looks squeaky clean like fun, and even the theme song seems kind of upbeat, and then these nasty things happen. It's probably a film that if you have a very dark sense of humor, you could sit with friends and watch and maybe laugh at the bad acting. Certainly not what the bad guy does to people. That's not funny in any way, but the acting of when he's freaking out is kind of silly, and a lot of the authority figures are not very well performed. Though, if you saw that trailer, Russell Johnson, the professor from Gilligan's Island, is in this film, and he plays the cop, the hard-nosed, tough-as-nails, hard-boiled super cop who's going to track down this bad guy and stop the killing, stop the senselessness. And just seeing Russell Johnson, seeing these people who are iconic for being on 60s TV sitcoms, doing anything else is always a novelty and weird. But when you see somebody from a squeaky clean 60s sitcom in a movie as sleazy as this a decade later, that's a little weird. That's a little odd, a little hard to fathom. It's just, yeah. So the extras are interesting on this. I believe you get a commentary. You get an interview with the woman who sang the theme song to the movie and her story. You get an alternate song that was intended to be the theme to the movie laid over the opening credits, so you can see what this even more upbeat song sounded like under the credits for this film. And it's a well-done package for a movie that by all rights should be getting no love from anybody just because it's a movie most people have never heard of, and it was never, I don't think, that popular film to begin with. But if you're a fan of the kind of stuff that I am and this movie, this is a heck of an upgrade from the old Something Weird image disc or the old Something Weird videotape, and it's a thing. Speaking of things, we're going to come on over here. This is a film you've all heard of. I'm not going to give much of a preamble to this so that I can talk about it a little bit more. This is Paul Verhoeven's classic from 1987 about a man turned into a machine who will not stop until the last of the criminal scum is swept off the streets. This is Robocop. Nice! So Robocop, pretty much everybody has probably seen this movie. What's interesting about Robocop is that this and Starship Troopers are very interesting. Starship Troopers, the trailers came out, I'm like, that looks stupid, I'm not gonna see it. Years later I do, and I'm like, wow, this is not what I thought. This is really smart, and this is attacking a lot of things that looks like it's glorifying. Robocop is the same way. This is a film that is years ahead of its time in making statements about militarization of police and fascism and shoot first, ask questions later and all that kind of stuff in the guise of this fun, poppy kind of ride that is this robot cop who can do anything. It's really smart, it's really dark, it's really funny, which again, the first time I saw it, I might not have gotten how slyly humorous this movie is, but it is. It makes fun of and takes shots at big corporations and putting the dollar in front of the person, all kinds of stuff. So we'll get this out of the way. It's Arrow. This looks fantastic. I can't say that this is the best it's ever looked because this movie has been released repeatedly on multiple formats. I know Criterion had an edition out for a while, so I can't say that it looks the best it ever has. It's the best I've ever seen it look. It looks fantastic. You get at least 3 versions of this movie across these 2 discs. You get the theatrical version that played in theaters, you get the director's cut that has even more gore in it, and then you get the TV version, which has, I haven't watched the TV version, but I know it has the creative dubbing of profanity that is kind of fun. And then there's a fun extra on here where it compares. It's a side-by-side comparison of these various versions. So if you don't want to watch the entire TV version and see what's different, there'll be this little featurette that tells you what the differences are. I didn't have a chance to look at the extras. pages of extras. You know, you're going down and you're scrolling down, 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 down. I have to imagine a lot of these are carried over from previous releases, but it is deluxe. There is a ton of extra stuff on here, from retrospective looks back at the film to contemporary behind the scenes stuff, commentaries. I mean, it's a Robocop explosion, I must say. So I think if you've ever owned Robocop before, this probably will replace that. I can't be 100% sure that there might be an extra in the past that's been left off, but I popped this in and I was immediately impressed with how great this movie is. You forget because it's been played to death on TV, and there were sequels in a cartoon show and a TV show that kind of cheapened how good the original was, I think. The more extra stuff that comes out attached to an original thing, you get farther and farther away and you start focusing on what came afterwards, and then you go back to the original and you're like, no, wait, this was really good. So Arrow has put out Robocop in an amazing edition. And that's what's funny about Arrow. They'll put out movies like Hitchhike to Hell that almost no normal people have heard of. And then they put out something like Robocop that is just like, oh my God, it's Robocop. So anyway, that's all I have to talk about. The clock is running down. I will be back again next week to talk about films including Dark Waters, maybe The Good Liar, maybe Last Christmas, maybe not, and stuff on video, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Slaughterhouse-5 from Arrow, Hustlers, It Chapter 2, on and on and on. At any rate, thanks for joining me again. I'm Mark. I will see you at the movies. Bye.